one of the things that comes to people who are old and sort of been out of it for a long time is they get called on to make introductions. I'm here to introduce one of those candidates, someone who has demonstrated by the service he gave to the people of his state, his capacity to get things done. He knows how to cut the size of government. He did that when he ran the county. He knows how to reduce deficits. He did that when he was governor. He knows how to save money for the taxpayers. He knows how to promote growth. He helped create over 150,000 jobs in the state. He knows how to drive unemployment down. He knows how to apply Republican principles. We are so fortunate that we have candidates that know how to get things done, coming to visit us and seeking our vote. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce a great governor, a governor who I think will probably be a candidate for president, Governor Scott Walker.
Well, it's an honor to be back, and first off, it's an honor not only to be back in New Hampshire, but to be introduced by Governor Sununu, and to be joined not only by the governor, but the great First Lady, Nancy Sununu. Thank you, as well. Let's give her a great round of applause as well. Governor, I want to tell you thank you. You heard it before, but I think it's worth saying thank you for your leadership in the party. Thank you for your leadership in the state. Thank you for your leadership in this country. You have made our country, this state, and our parties that much better. We appreciate your leadership, and we appreciate the fact you didn't just do it, you continue to do it even today. Thank you very much. It is great to be back here today. In fact, I feel like I've spent the whole day eating in New Hampshire. Because as some of you know, before I came over, I was over in Concord, and we were eating, we were having politics and pie. I said it was perfect. I got apple pie. The only thing better for me would have been to warm up the pie, a little bit of apple pie warmed up with a little bit of Wisconsin ice cream on the top. Would have been perfect, but I was feeling pretty good in that regard. I was in Franklin before that. We had some pizza with the mayor and actually went to a new candy store in downtown Franklin. I said, you know, sometimes how smells bring me back. In many years, I was in a new candy store and I found in a jar, you know, those orange circus peanuts, you know, the marshmallow ones, and I opened it up and it brought me back 40 years. So I bought a bag of those and ate them all, so I'm a little bit sick today. But then we started out earlier with a great house party with State Representative Gallagher, Brian, and his wife Karen did a wonderful job of having a great group of people join and welcome Tonette and I. And we had a great boat cruise last night. In fact, you all were so nice in this state that we got in late. We were doing a Fox News interview, got out late out of New York, and the boat came back for us. So I said, I was wondering how I was going to have to swim out there, but it came back. In fact, that was apparently there was a quota as to how many governors could be on. Governor Pataki was on, he had to come off, and then I got back on. Apparently, you can only have so many governors on at a time. There were a couple of us, but we appreciate you having us back. And it was mentioned before in the introduction, but I just want to begin. I don't think you can do this enough, but I'm going to talk in a moment about our state for a minute or two and then give you 3 reasons why there's a real difference looking ahead to this race for president and what's emerging here. But I want to begin by, we're going to talk a lot in the next few minutes about freedom. And freedom is important to think about because freedom is something that is endowed by our Creator, defined by our Constitution, but defended each and every day by the men and women who proudly wear the uniform of the United States. I'm going to take you one up. You mentioned veterans, you mentioned parents. I'm going to ask yet again, it's good after dinner anyway, it's good to get a cheap standing ovation if nothing else, right? But to have all of our veterans, to have our service members, and to have any of the family members, because not just the parents, there's a lot of spouses of veterans here as well, and we know how tough it's been, whether you were deployed in the last couple of years or you deployed several generations ago. Would you all stand? Our military, our personnel, our veterans, and any of the family members here. Let's give them all a great round of applause. I carry in my pocket, as Governor Sununu knows, one of the great honors and distinctions of being a governor is for each of us, respectively, we're the commander-in-chief of our Wisconsin, in my case, Wisconsin National Guard here in the Granite State, New Hampshire National Guard, others out there. And I think it's important not just to thank those who served, but to remember, don't remember anything else tonight, remember that as we speak, there are still men and women deployed in active duty in the reserve and in the Guard from states all across this great country. And sometimes the media forgets to talk about that, but we still have families who are praying every night for their loved one's safe return. I ask you to do the same thing with all of us here for all that they embody across this great country. It's been great to be around the state a little bit. I didn't get, unlike the congressman, I wasn't out long enough to get a complete sunburn, but we did have a good time around the state. It took some questions, which when I was thinking about the 19 staff members for Hillary Clinton, I guess it's about double the number of questions she's taken from the media thus far. And I think we took as many outside of the politics and pie event today. But there's going to be a great conference. I mean, think about it. I'm going to share in a few moments, again, three key distinctions. But overall, it's pretty simple. When you think about the difference between Hillary Clinton and what we as Republicans have to offer, it's pretty simple. I can summarize it in about a minute. Hillary Clinton believes in the top-down, government knows best, Washington will tell you what to do, when to do, and how to do it mentality. It hasn't worked in the past. Versus us as Republicans, we believe you grow the economy from the ground up in a way that's new and fresh and organic and dynamic. It says, you want to live your own life, you want to start your own career, you want to build your own business, as long as you don't violate the health and safety of your neighbor, go out and do your own thing. Knock yourself out, live your own life. We're the ones that want to defend the American dream. And so I appreciate, Jennifer, when you were talking about before, that's a great synopsis of what you said before. And I just wish you could get a state party chair with a little bit of enthusiasm. And I've been around chairing board, but thank you for that enthusiasm. And it's infectious, and it's exciting. And I'll give you a little insight. Our state budget in Wisconsin ends at the end of June. And I've said as governor, every 2 years, my commitment to my state is to make sure we get a solid budget through. I'm proud to say we're on track for the 5th and the 6th year in a row with this budget. We have lowered property taxes from where they were the December before we took office. Not just the rate, actually lowered property taxes in a typical home, and we do a number of other things that will support our veterans and do all sorts of other great positive things in our state. But after that, I've said once that job is fulfilled at the end of June, we're going to make an announcement as to what our intentions are. You might get an idea that maybe it has something to do with a lot of visits to New Hampshire and a couple other states across this country. But it's really important, I would say, not just for what Governor Sununu mentioned in terms of being first in the nation, the first primary, and really setting the standard for our party, but I would add to that, having been here enough already this year and having been here before for your state party convention, looking at what's on the ballot in November of 2016, I would challenge each of you here that you have a responsibility that goes far beyond the primary. You have a responsibility that goes to November of 2016, where I believe, and I certainly know if I were to run and to win, or to do well, not just in this primary, but I'd be back between that time and November of 2016, because I think New Hampshire is going to be key to not only electing the next Republican president, but to sending back a Republican majority in the United States Senate, when you send your great state senator back, and when you add with the members of hopefully adding one more member to join you here in this state, having 2 Republicans in Congress to add to the majorities in the House of Representatives. You have a big responsibility. If we throw our hat in the ring, I'm not just going to be here for the primaries. I'm going to come back, if I have the honor of serving as a nominee, to make the case, not just to Republican voters, but independent voters here in New Hampshire, that we've got a great team, and we need to make sure we send those voices from New Hampshire to Washington and continue to get that message out. Now let me just spend literally just a couple minutes telling you about where I come from and how that relates to some of the things I think we need to do in this country. And many of you here helped us. You might remember a couple years ago, literally at the beginning of our term, we had about 100,000, well, actually a little more than 100,000 protesters come in and occupy our Capitol. In fact, I always tell the folks in New York, the Occupy movement did not start in Wall Street. It started in Madison, Wisconsin, in our state capital, literally. And after they lost, they moved on to Wall Street, and then they went elsewhere around the country. So my apologies for having started all that in Wisconsin. But the reason they came, and the reason so many were bussed in, shipped in, flown in from around the country, was because something really fundamental was at stake in what we did 4 years ago, plus now in my home state. And that is, we took power out of the hands of the big government special interest and put it in the hands of the hardworking taxpayer. That's simply what we did. That's why they were so focused on trying to intimidate. That's why they came in, and not just at the protests, but the death threats. They focused not just on me and Tonette, but on our sons. They were targeted on Facebook. They went after our state lawmakers. They did all these things. Why? Because in the past, that had worked. It worked across the country, whether it was at the federal or at the state or the local level. Groups like that try to intimidate elected officials, and all too often, sadly, in the past, it had worked. Thankfully, in our case, what it did was the worse they got, the more brutal the attacks, the more brutal the protests, the more obnoxious things were. Instead of intimidating, it made us refocus on why we got elected in the first place. And I'm proud to say, some 4 years later, our state is much better off because of it. In fact, I remember back in 2009 when Tonette and I sat down and talked about, thought about, and prayed about getting in the race. We knew it'd be tough. My state has not gone Republican for president since 1984. Think about it, 84. That's when Reagan won everything except Mondale's home state in the District of Columbia. So that's a long ways back, and even then, that was probably a bit of an anomaly because that was the year when Reagan won just about everything in the country. And so we knew it would be tough, but we knew, we looked at our state at the time with the high unemployment rate, with the number of jobs lost, with taxes going up through the roof, with all the other things that a Democrat governor, a Democrat legislature were doing at the time, we knew our state was not heading the right direction. And as parents, Tonette and I knew that for Matt and Alex's sake, our two sons, and for all the others in their generation, we had to stand up and do something about it. So we ran that election in 2010. We, by the grace of God and the support of our voters, we won the election. And then shortly thereafter, we knew we had to do something right away. A friend of mine, friend of Governor Sununu's, Mitch Daniels, Governor Daniels said to me, he was one of my great early mentors along with Tommy Thompson, the former governor of Wisconsin, but Mitch said to me, you got to strike early. You got to take action early. You got to reform right off the bat, because the longer you wait, the more the excuse will be, it's too close to the next election. So the other good advantage of doing it early is it gives you more time to prove that your reforms work before the next election. And so we got out there and we pushed these big reforms. I remember going into our state capitol and the caucuses with both houses of the legislature. In fact, it reminded me a little bit of Big Ten football. I needed a wedge of troopers in front of me and a wedge behind me to get through the crowd that was amassed even in the hallways of the state capitol. And I came in and we told our lawmakers, we need to think more about the next generation than we do about the next election. And the good news is, once we did that, the next election took care of itself. You see, we were targeted not just for those protests, but eventually they went after us with the recall. And because we stood up and held our ground and the results started to happen, I went from the spring of 2011 where our poll numbers were so low, Time magazine actually had a headline that said, "Dead Man Walker." Literally, that was the headline. We went from that low in the polls to the June the year after, on June 5th of 2012, we won the recall election with more votes in a not only percentage basis, but more actual votes in a special election of June of 2012 than we had won in November of 2010. Our economy that once had an unemployment rate at the beginning of 2010 at 9.2% unemployment, last month was down to 4.4% unemployment. Our state that once had a $3.6 billion budget deficit, now for 4 years in a row has had a balanced budget, and our next state budget that I proposed begins with a nearly $500 million surplus. Our rainy day fund's 165 times bigger than we took office. Our pension's the only one fully funded in the country. So we took on our economic and our fiscal challenges. But we did more than that. One of the things that you'll hardly ever hear about in the press is we didn't just take on those issues, we transformed the way government operates, not just at the state, but at the local level. In our state, there's no longer seniority or tenure. That means we can hire based on merit, pay based on performance. That means we can put the best and the brightest in our classrooms, and we can pay them to be there. And the great news for us, for Tonette and I as proud parents, is we watch with our kids and then with our nieces and others out there Others in school, last 4 years, graduation rates have gone up. Third grade reading scores have gone up. ACT scores are now second best in the country for states where more than half the kids take the ACT exam. So despite what all those protesters said about how awful it would be, it actually has gotten better. We didn't just stop at public schools. We expanded school choice vouchers statewide. We lifted the cap on charter schools and virtual schools and provided more course options for homeschool parents. Why? Because we know if you want a great economy and a great state, you got to make sure that every parent has the opportunity to send their son or daughter to a great school, whether it's a traditional public school, or a charter school, or a choice school, or private school, or virtual school, or even in your home. Every child deserves a great education. We did all those things, and then we went down the list. We did lawsuit reform and regulatory reform. We defunded Planned Parenthood and passed pro-life legislation. We passed castle doctrine and concealed carry so that law-abiding citizens can protect themselves, their family, and their loved ones. We're now, believe it or not, in the industrial Midwest, the 25th state in the nation to have right-to-work legislation that allows people to work whether they're in a labor union or not. And I'm proud to say that in our state over the past 4 years, we've now enacted a law that says it's easy to vote, but hard to cheat. In our state, you need a photo ID before you show up at the ballot box. Now, I tell you all that not to brag, well, maybe not too much, but rather to give hope and inspiration that if a state that is blue as Wisconsin is and has been for as long as it was, if we can do that and not just do it, but then get elected and then elected again, and not just in my case, but in 10, we went all Republican in the legislature. In 12, we added seats, and in 14, added seats. The same time I was up in the recall and the re-elect. If we can do it in a state as blue as Wisconsin, what gives me hope for America is we know we've got a House. We just added a Senate. If we keep the House, if we keep the Senate, and we elect a reform-minded Republican as the next President of the United States, I have no doubt we can turn America great again as well. Let me give you 3 examples of why that's so important. First off, when I hear this president, and I hear people like Hillary Clinton talk about growing the economy, you know what they mean? They mean growing Washington. Think about it. Last year, literally, last year report showed that 6 of the top 10 wealthiest counties in America, you know where they were? In and around Washington, D.C. That's because that's how they think you grow the economy. They're still wondering what happened with the GDP report because they're thinking, wow, everybody's growing in the Washington area. We know in New Hampshire, Wisconsin, anywhere else outside of what I call 68 square miles surrounded by reality, which is Washington, D.C., where the rest of us live in reality, we know that you grow the economy in cities and towns and villages, that people create jobs, not the government. It's about time to get the government out of the way so that people can move this country forward. That means everything from regulatory reform, really reining in the federal government to allow job creators to put more people to work, to repealing Obamacare, to allowing patients and families to make decisions about their health care. To use the abundance that God has given us here in this country and on this continent when it comes to energy, all the above, to allow us to literally fuel our nation's recovery, and then to lower the tax burden. To lower the tax burden not just on individuals, but on job creators, where we have a competitive rate again so that American job creators can bring jobs back from overseas and put more of our fellow Americans back to work. Sometimes people ask, why do I focus so much on reducing the burden on hardworking taxpayers? I'm proud to say in our state we've cut taxes $2 billion on individual income tax rates, reducing brackets, on employer taxes, on property taxes I mentioned, so they're lower today than they were when we started. Why do we focus so much on lowering taxes? And some of you have heard me say this before, but it's a great story to remember. I said I explain it when I talk about my focus on tax relief. It ties into Tonette and I. Tonette and I, some of you may know, on February 6th, we celebrated our 22nd wedding anniversary. Hey. You should clap for her, not for me. For 22 years, she's put up with me in these dinners, right? But when you think about it, it's a great way to explain this. In 1993, not long after I was married, I made a critical mistake as a newlywed. I went out to a place called Kohl's Department Store in my neighborhood, and I bought something for the price it was marked at. Now, if you've ever been to Kohl's, you know what I'm talking about. Now, today, I've learned over the years, if I'm going to go to Kohl's, I go to that rack that says it was $29.99, and now it's marked down to $19.99. And then as we go up to the cash register to check out, we get out that insert from the Sunday newspaper that gives us another 15 or 20% off. Or maybe I remembered to go get the flyer we get at our house, because we go to Kohl's all the time, and it gives us 15 or 20, or if we're really lucky, 30% off, right? And then as we go up to ring it all up, Toinette usually is there, and she reaches into her purse, pulls out some Kohl's cash, lays it on the counter, and next thing you know, the cashier says, "We're paying you to buy that shirt." Well, not quite, but it kind of feels like it, right? So I said, how does a company like Kohl's make money? They make it off of volume, right? You see, they could sell a few of those shirts at $29.99, or they could lower the price and broaden the volume, and next thing you know, they make more money off of the volume of sales. That's what I think about your money. We could charge some of you high rates, and a few of you could afford to pay it, or we can lower the rates, broaden the base, have more people participate in the American economy, and do better overall, because you're better off spending your money than the government is. I call that the Kohl's curve. With all respect to my friend Art Laffer, it's no longer the Laffer curve, it's the Kohl's curve going forward. That's why taxes need to be lower. Now, in addition to growth, the second big thing that I think is a huge difference between where we as Republicans stand and where people like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are, and that's about reform, the size and scope in government. You know, when you hear Hillary Clinton, when you hear Barack Obama, they talk in a way that makes me think that they believe they measure success in government by how many people are dependent on the government. Medicaid, food stamps, unemployment, you name it. We, not just as Republicans, but I think overwhelmingly as Americans, we believe you measure success in government by just the opposite, by how many people are no longer dependent on the government. We understand that true freedom and prosperity do not come from the mighty hand of the government. They come from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destinies to the dignity that's born of work. When I think about my childhood, I remember early on in life, one of my first jobs was washing dishes at the Countryside restaurant. Later in high school, we moved up to the big time. I started flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. Hey! That's the Big Mac right there, that's right. In fact, Congressman, you'll get a kick out of this. Paul Ryan, my friend Congressman Paul Ryan, was at the McDonald's in Janesville, about 20 miles down the road from me. I was flipping burgers in developed element. The only difference is Paul's manager literally told him, this is true, told him he had to flip hamburgers in the back because he didn't have the interpersonal skills to work the front cash register. Don't kid him about that. He's a good guy, but yeah, my manager probably thought the same thing, but Rita was too polite to say it. But I think about growing up there, not just in the jobs that we had and the work ethic that we learned as kids, but I think about my family and my parents. My dad was a preacher in a small town. My mom was a part-time secretary and a bookkeeper and raised my brother and I. My grandparents on my mother's side were farmers, where they didn't have indoor plumbing until my mother went off to junior high school. My dad's dad, Grandpa Walker, was a machinist for 42 years at Barbara Coleman in Rockford, Illinois. When I think back for my brother and I about what we learned along the way from our parents and our grandparents, we did not inherit fame or fortune from our family. What we got was the belief that if you work hard and you play by the rules, you can do and be anything you want. That's the American dream. We need people fighting for that American dream.
Crop TV.